what I want to talk to you about in 25 minutes is work that I've done and that others have done as well. I mean, so everything I'm talking about here, the credit is shared around amongst a group of us. There are about now 150 people doing research on this area, and what we would like to tell you about is really what we think of as the largest paradigm shift in innovation since the Industrial Revolution. This is a good change, not a bad change like the crisis that you're seeing in finance. So I hope you're pleased at that. Now, I wonder if I can talk into this one as well. Yeah, I can. Okay, so, well, what's going on here, what's going on here is something quite interesting. The historical method of innovating has been that manufacturers are the innovators. Economists ever since Schumpeter have argued that manufacturers must be the innovators. Why? Because there are many users, and a manufacturer can aggregate the demand from those many users and produce something better than any individual user could, because he can spend more money at it. So what you see up there is a curve where over time, for instance, in a particular market, you will have some new product, whether it's a heart-lung machine or a skateboard, and the market begins at the left-hand side and then it grows. And you can see, if you focus at the middle of the market, that yes, indeed, there are a lot of users relative to the manufacturers. But at the beginning, things are quite different. And so what I'm going to tell you about in 25 minutes is the policy related to and the phenomena of user-centered innovation. In that phenomenon, it's quite different. Users innovate. At the left side of the curve, users innovate. They then form communities as the innovations get better. They actually, at this point, are getting so strong at innovation, as I'll try to show you, that they are driving manufacturers out of innovation design. The economics are such that in most fields, most of the time, as we're sort of finding now, users collaborating openly dominate manufacturer innovation. Okay. So now, here's an example that will give you a feeling for what I mean. There was a man named John Haysham Gibbon who was a heart surgeon. And he had a patient who died on his operating table, and he knew that he could have saved that patient if only he'd been able to stop her heart temporarily, route the blood around it, fix the heart, and then start the heart pumping again. So he went to manufacturers and he said, you know, what I need is a heart-lung machine. And they said, well, that's really very interesting. Does anybody else want one? And he said, well, I don't think so, not yet, but there will be a great need. Then they looked at him even more carefully and they said, well, have you developed any operations to use it? And he said, well, no, because it doesn't exist yet. And they said, well, in that case, my son, please go elsewhere. Now, he then spent 20 years, remember, he is a surgeon. He spent 20 years developing the first heart-lung machine, and that's what you see in the picture there. Remember, he's a surgeon, he's not an engineer. And then what happened was the manufacturers came in because users collectively began to say, well, that's a pretty good thing, I think I'll make myself a copy. And then manufacturers came in. Now, that makes sense, doesn't it? Manufacturers like large and certain markets. Users at the leading edge need something. And if they have to do it, they have to do it themselves, because the market from the manufacturer's point of view looks small and uncertain. Now, so what we have then is we have these lead users. The market looks unattractive, and what I'll show you over time also is what happens next is that users also form firms. And why this would be interesting to policymakers is that we get not only user innovations, but many firms are formed by users. And this in turn, as you know, since the small firm is a large chunk of the economy, is an important matter. I'll also show you that we're not measuring this right, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now what does a user innovation look like? On the left, one of the things that we saw, we studied many fields, and one of the things that we saw was that in this field of scientific instruments, users developed about 80% of the instruments, but manufacturers didn't necessarily know it. So what does a user innovation look like? It looks like the thing on the left. It is a collage, it is a bricolage, it is a collection of things that users put together to achieve their new function. So they take a machine from one thing, they take another part from something else, they put it together to make the innovation. In this particular case, what the innovation was the first automated radioimmunoassay machine. A doctor had to do a study with 20,000 heart patients. The speed with which he could do those manually simply wasn't up to the task, so he automated the system. Now, after a lag, and an average in that field it's 5 to 7 years, the manufacturer begins to produce something. Now, what the manufacturer then produces is on the right-hand side. The manufacturer, you must understand, is putting what is on the left into the right, right? That is inside his product. But when you ask the manufacturer, well, did the user do anything? He'll say, not really. He might have had an idea, but there was no operator's manual. There was no, I mean, you know, there was no space for our corporate logo on the front. It wasn't a product at all. Anyway, so what you see then is a misunderstanding about where innovation comes from. Users, when they develop something, other users pick it up, and so you would actually have quite a number of users innovating before a manufacturer comes in several years later. Here's another example. This is in agriculture. It's center pivot irrigation. In the middle there is a well, and these things, you might have seen these circles. And the British call them, I think, crop circles. But anyway, you said these circles. And this is the first one of those machines, and it was made by a farmer. And you can see again that the farmer took what was around, namely agricultural equipment, those are actually wheels from an old tractor, and he put it together and he made the innovation, and many people around Iowa started to reproduce this as farmers. Eventually manufacturers came in, and this is what they produced. And you can see that it's much fancier, but it is the same thing. And again, fascinatingly enough, what you have is a situation where if you ask that manufacturer, which I did, I said, well, who invented this thing, you or someone else? And they said, well, we did, my son. And I said, well, did you get any input from users living or dead? And they said, certainly not. You know, and when you send us a plaque, be sure to spell our names right. So the point here is twofold. One is that innovation is done by users. It makes sense that it's done by users, and manufacturers often don't know it. And if manufacturers don't know it, they don't know where to look. Now, the definition of a user is not just an individual. The definition of a user is when the developer expects to benefit from using an innovation. An innovation is a manufacturer innovation when the developer expects to benefit from selling it. So for example, in the case of Airbus, let's say, if they make a new machine which will be used to make an airplane, that's a user innovation. It's not just individuals, it's firms. Airbus, on the other hand, when it makes the 380, that's a manufacturer innovation. They expect to benefit from selling it. Okay, now, users don't always develop all innovations. And when we get data like this, we've done a lot of studies on different areas, and when we get data like this, we can explore why it is. And one of the things we find, I'm going to go quickly, I'm sorry. One of the things we find is that the users develop the functionally novel innovations that start markets or change them. Users, as in the case of the heart-lung machine, develop the things where the manufacturer does not know quite what it's for. When the function has been well established, the manufacturer then might make a more efficient heart-lung machine or something like that. So users are crucial in starting new industries and new fields. Now, I'm going to go across this. The next thing we find is that users innovate a lot. It's not a rare phenomenon. A lot of users innovate. If you look at there, you see 22% of surgeons, those affiliated in this case with university clinics, 22% of them modify their equipment or make new equipment. In the case of consumer goods, which are not measured in industry statistics at all, what we have is, for instance, 20% of mountain bike users. Again, these are people who are passionate about it, not your average user. Around MIT, we don't have any mountains, so we don't have many people modifying bikes. But in areas where they are passionate about this sport, 20% of the people are modifying them. Now, something fascinating for policymakers begins to come out of this, because you start to say, if a large fraction of the consumers, whether they're industrial firms or user firms, are innovating, collectively, that is much more effort than all the R&D people in the manufacturing firms. So we are not measuring, basically, the bulk of innovation activity.